So this is a little bit of a roundup of a few studies that we have done over the last quite a few years in the area-wide management project. And it's trying to distill a little bit of what we found about the virus diseases and how they change with the weather. So viruses aren't normally a big problem until they are. And what changes to make the viruses a problem? Can be a new virus coming into the area, a new strain of a virus, a recombination, so two different viruses get together and make some new virus babies that go around and change how they interact with crops. Could be a new insect vector or another sort of vector that moves the viruses around coming into the area. Could be different variety that doesn't have as much tolerance to a virus as previously grown or resistance. And it could be weeds that have moved into the area that weren't there before, and the virus hangs out in there a lot better than the weeds that were there in the area already. Or the weather's all changing up. The weather will change, obviously, maybe what crops are growing, what weeds are in the area, and what vectors are moving around. So it'll actually change all of these things as well. But in the local scale, the weather can have quite a big effect on the virus problems. So in a lot of the vegetable growing areas, it's discontinuous season. So there is a break between one season and the next, and you're not getting continual cropping. So the virus doesn't really build up in the crop over years and years and years. So it's always the entrance of the virus coming in from some other time. So just a couple of case studies we'll be going through. So a new virus came in Bowen in about 2011. They lost a fair bit of money in the next year. It's whitefly transmitted tomato yellow leaf curl virus, and there's been occasional large outbreaks since, obviously because it's in this talk, driven by the weather. And the same for down in the Fassifern on French bean crops. So the first season that it was really a problem, in 2016, people estimate that they lost about $400,000 just for that autumn season. And it's a whitefly transmitted Kala virus called cowpea mild mottle virus. So just a little bit of basic virology. So primary spread is where the virus is living in weeds and the insects is living on the weeds, and then it transfers them into the crop. Secondary spread is where the crop is infected, the insect likes the crop, and it moves the virus from crop plant to crop plant. So at the beginning of a season, you always get a primary spread event. So from the weeds around where the virus and the insects are hanging out into your crop plants. And then from there, it goes into and then if the insect likes the crop, they might hang out there and then spread it to the other plants when there's time for it to get in there. Some of the cases, the insects don't like the crop plants, or the crop plants are sprayed for insects enough that you very rarely get secondary spread, but you can still get large crop losses just due to primary spread, just continual movement over and over. And I guess we'll call primary spread when you have an old block that's infected with virus, and the insects, as you let it go, the insects move from there into your nice new block as well. So that's also a primary spread event. So what can the weather change? The weather changes how fast your insects grow. If it's warmer, they multiply quicker, colder, slower. Same with the virus, it will multiply in the host plants quicker or slower depending on the weather. But the biggest thing we see for driving virus epidemics is the weeds. So if you have late season rain, early season rain, it changes the weed and the alternative host profile out in the environment, which changes your risk of getting viruses. So here's a crazy graph. Basically, there was lots of whitefly, then sometimes no whiteflies. There was lots of whiteflies with tomato yellow leaf curl, lots of whiteflies without tomato yellow leaf curl. There was none at times, and the virus incidence in the crop would be going up and down, and basically there's not much you can say about this graph except we don't really know what's going on. The number of whiteflies doesn't mean that you're going to have high virus. There can be really high virus and nearly no whiteflies. In the dry tropics, it's driven, again, they come in, there's a very definite wet season and a very definite dry season, and the whitefly numbers are all dependent on that. So if we look here, here's the original rainfall. So the wet season, November through to March normally, and you get high rainfall events. And you see the whitefly there in the orange. After the first peak, it's sort of very low and then builds up over, May through to September. Again, then you come to wet season again, knocks the whitefly right back, creeps back up from July through September. In 2015, there was not much rain in March, which meant that the whiteflies were starting at a very high level. And that year we had quite a lot of virus incidents. So it went, it's not getting knocked back at the end of the rainy season, and it's starting at a high level and shooting up from there. Conversely, in 2016, it was quite a low wet season, so not much rain. And by May, the whitefly was at an incredibly high number for that time of year, almost as much as we saw at September the previous year. It really hadn't been knocked down at all during that time. But there was late rain in May, in June. So that rain actually knocked the numbers back to almost none, and it was a very low whitefly year. So moving to the falciparum, it's over the 4 years we're looking at it. There was 2 high years of virus pressure and 2 low years. The temperature was consistent over the time. The amount of plants growing through the district was pretty much similar. Basically though, the summer and autumn early rainfall did vary. So when the amount, if you have a high rainfall, the whiteflies don't like it. And if you have low continual rainfall, then they survive quite well. So low rainfall in 2016 and 2019, lots of virus. Conversely, high rainfall, 2017, 2018, low incidence. In 2019, there was a rapid drop in the number of whitefly in that early March season, similar to what we saw in that late rain in the Bowen district. And the silverleaf whitefly populations were quite low in the 2017-18 because of the high rainfall events. So we went out there almost every 2 weeks, I think, for a whole, over the 4 years, but this is just 1 year. So you see a bunch of whiteflies in 2019 coming up, and the virus incidence really high with the whitefly. So whitefly don't like to live in French bean. You will find very few nymphs in a bean crop, but you can find lots of adults. So you can see high aphid numbers, whitefly numbers, at the beginning, and you'll see a lot of virus incidents up the beginning as well. Then later on in the season, you see almost no whiteflies out there, but the virus incidence keeps kicking on in those blocks because of that initial movement. And let's have it. So the rainfall over these years, you see that in the 2 years, in the 16-17, where there's almost no virus, and the 18-19, you see those high rainfall events in March, which is really one that's knocking down the whiteflies. So a good amount of late season rain with these whitefly vectored viruses will probably mean low incidence. That's not always the case though. So if it's not high enough, unfortunately, the late rain will also allow a green bridge. So in the dry tropics, you get your weeds growing, your viruses in there, yeah, whiteflies love to live in there. Then by the time you're coming to plant your early crops, hopefully there has been no rain and those weeds are dying off, so there's nothing for the whiteflies to live in. But if you get late rain, but it's not enough, it means that those weeds can continue on into those early plantings, and then they die off, and then the whiteflies move into your young, happy plants and spread the virus there. So the virus levels can really be dependent on local climate effects. So if you are extending that green bridge, it might only be in a small area. So just late rains, late showers are extending that green bridge. And it can have quite an effect on some just local crops, but not others. Whiteflies can't swim. So if it's heavy enough, it'll knock the whiteflies down majorly. Aphids don't swim very well either, but they tend to work better. So if you have continual rain through a season and they're used to the weeds drying off, a lot of the time the aphids don't like your crop plants, so they're happier if there's just continual light rain over the season to hang out in the weeds for their whole life. They'd rather be doing that than going into your crop plant. A lot of the times, if there is no rain, the alternative host dies off and the only green thing around for miles is your crops, and the aphids will move in then. And pretty much, it's just another reason to complain about the weather. It's a very complex interaction between the vectors, the viruses, and the hosts. And it can be sometimes hyperlocal, which is why it's really hard to predict when it's going to be a big or bad year. But if you have a late rain for a whitefly vectored virus and it's heavy enough, you're probably going to have very little virus incidence. Thank you.